Have you ever felt the adrenaline rush of pulling the lever on a slot machine thinking, this time it will be different, this time I will win big? Now imagine feeling the same adrenaline rush every time you open up a virtual box in a video game, hoping to receive the item or character that you've been desperately searching for. Welcome to the world of gacha mechanics, a controversial game mechanic that has taken the game industry by storm. Gacha mechanics have become a staple feature in popular video games like Genshin Impact or Arc Knights, but with their potential for addiction and financial ruin, they have also sparked a heated debate. And today we will explore whether gacha mechanics are a form of gambling and the potential impact they can have on players. And we will do so by looking at one game in particular, Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact is definitely not the only game implementing gacha, and not even the first one, but it is probably the most well known. So buckle up for a rollercoaster ride of emotions as we delve into the world of gacha mechanics in Genshin Impact. It is important to note that while gacha mechanics in video games are definitely a topic of controversy and concern, it does not mean that video games who use them are inherently bad. In the case of Genshin Impact, despite the criticism of its gacha system, it is still a highly entertaining game with many positive aspects. The game boasts stunning visuals, a vast and immersive open world, and engaging gameplay mechanics that keep the players hooked. Additionally, the game has a rich storyline and a vast cast of characters that players can get invested in. But first off, what even is gacha? Gacha is a term that originates from Japanese toy vending machines, where you can insert a coin, turn a knob, and you receive a random toy in a plastic capsule. If you have been to Akihabara in Tokyo, or maybe you've seen some YouTube videos on it, you will definitely recognize those kinds of machines. They are all over the place. Gacha mechanics in video games follow a similar concept, where players spend virtual or real currency to obtain a randomized item, character, or weapon from a pool of possibilities. In video games, gacha mechanics are often used to incentivize a player to spend money by creating a sense of unpredictability and excitement. Players may be able to receive a rare or powerful item that gives them an advantage in the game, but the chances of receiving those items are often low. This creates a sense of gambling-like anticipation or addiction, where players keep spending money in hopes of obtaining those rare items.
We're going to bring it home, right?
Gacha mechanics have become increasingly popular in free-to-play mobile games or other online games like, for example, Genshin Impact, Fate Grand Order, Fire Emblem Heroes, Arc Knights, just to name a few. While those games do offer some items for free, the better ones are usually locked behind the gacha and do require the player to spend money in order to obtain them. This has led to controversy and debate about whether gacha mechanics are a form of gambling and should be treated and regulated as such. When I personally first encountered gacha, it mostly reminded me of trading card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering that I played when I was younger. Both involve you spending money on a pack of random items that you just hope will contain whatever you want. And if you really do want something specific, there's always someone you can pay money for it. Although most of us kids never had any cards that were worth anything. So on the other hand, gacha games are usually digital, and there is often no real way to resell what you get. Genshin Impact actually seems to make it quite clear that they don't really want any kind of player economy that they have to take care of in the long run. Now, you could argue that they just don't want to hurt their own income stream. That is obviously one possibility, but there could actually be other reasons for this as well. We have seen in games like Diablo and Counter-Strike that player economies can be quite tricky. I actually believe that if you really want to make some kind of player economy work properly, you probably have to go into the realm of blockchains and NFTs, and that is a rabbit hole that we are not gonna go down today. There are several similarities between gacha mechanics in video games and traditional gambling. The first would be randomization. Both gacha mechanics and traditional gambling involve the element of chance. In gacha, players spend money to obtain a randomized item. In gambling, players place bets on uncertain outcomes. The second element would be the thrill of the unknown. Both gacha and traditional gambling create a sense of anticipation and excitement due to the unpredictability of the outcomes. Players experience a thrill when they open a loot box or place a bet, not knowing if they will actually win. Both gacha mechanics and traditional gambling can trigger the sunk cost fallacy, where players keep investing time and money even if they don't win or receive the desired item. This is because they think that stopping now would actually result in a loss that is so big that winning is the only chance to get out of this. There is actually a lot of research on the sunk cost fallacy in traditional finance, and it has been proven over and over again that this is complete stupidity. Both gacha and traditional gambling involve some kind of financial risk, where players can lose money by spending more than they can actually afford. In both cases, there is also the anticipation of a big win. This anticipation can actually be very powerful, as it creates a sense of optimism that can be very compelling to many players. These similarities are what have led some critics to argue that gacha and gambling are actually exactly the same thing and should be regulated as such. Gacha mechanics in video games can cause a range of potential harms. The most typical ones are addiction, financial loss, and psychological distress. The combination of anticipation and reward can create a dopamine rush in your brain. This can lead to problematic gaming behaviors and can even lead to addiction. As I said before, gacha games often require or incentivize players to spend real-life money. And while you have the chance to obtain a rare item or weapon or whatever, those chances are usually quite low, which means you have to play more, you have to spend more. This can lead to players spend a large amount of money in order to acquire a singular item. This in turn can easily lead to financial losses. On the internet, there are actually more than enough stories from players spending, from my point of view, absurd amounts of money on Genshin Impact. And outside of the game, it actually gets a little bit harder to just press the quit play button or to throw a controller against the wall if something goes wrong. Gacha can easily create a sense of pressure to keep playing in order to obtain your items. This pressure can lead to stress, anxiety, and in some cases even depression. If you want to know about the effects depression can have on people, there is once again more than enough research done on that you can read. Also, players can easily feel disappointed or upset, maybe even worthless if they are not able to obtain the item that they wanted, which just adds to the stress that is already there. Overall, gacha can have a lot of potential harms, particularly for vulnerable individuals. It can be said that therefore it is important for video game companies, like the people who make those games, to take steps to minimize those risks. And it's also important to provide players with clear information about the odds and maybe even the potential costs of obtaining items through the gacha mechanics. But pushing the responsibility only to the developers is probably not going to solve anything. Players themselves have also been a part of the solution and should be encouraged to practice responsible gaming behaviors. And if you're experiencing any negative effects from playing those games, go seek some help. There are people who are specializing in this kind of stuff. Now, I am sure most of you already know about Genshin Impact, but for completeness sake, Genshin Impact is a popular action role-playing game developed and published by the Chinese studio MiHoYo, now HoYoverse, which was released in September 2020 for multiple platforms including PC, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Android and iOS. The game is set in an open world called Tevat, which players can freely explore, discover hidden secrets and engage in battles with a variety of enemies. While the game is already pretty big, they add a new piece of content about every 3 weeks in order to keep players engaged. This was actually a main selling point and a big reason why many players were excited to get a game that practically never ends. Most of the characters or weapons that you get in Genshin Impact, you get through so-called wishes. Wishes are categorized in different banners. Those banners don't always stay the same. Some of them change from time to time so that you get introduced to new characters and new weapons. And you obtain wishes by spending an in-game currency called Primogems. While you can buy Primogems, you can also get a lot of Primogems from just playing the game, which means that at least in the beginning, while you still have a lot of Tevat to explore, you usually don't really lack that much in Primogems, and you can participate quite actively in the gacha. However, as soon as you get to the end game, except for a few Primogems that you get from the occasional event, there is not that much to do anymore, and in order to get wishes, you actually have to pay money. However, technically this is optional. You can play the game without spending anything, and even if you participate in the gacha, you usually get something. This is quite important because we have to remember one thing. HoYoverse is actually a Chinese company. The Chinese government, compared to many other governments, especially in the West, has very, very strict regulations on gambling. In China, most forms of gambling are completely illegal. Online gambling is also strictly prohibited in China. The Chinese government takes such a strong stance against gambling due to its potential for social and economic harm. They are actually quite well known for shutting down casinos casinos, arresting operators and participants, and blocking access to mostly foreign gambling websites. The Chinese government has also already expressed strong concerns about gacha in video games. In November 2020, they actually did introduce some new regulations that require video game producers to actually disclose the probabilities of obtaining items through gacha. They also require developers to put in system that limits the amount of money players can actually spend on the game. Companies that violate those terms do face fines and other penalties. One common counter-argument that gacha is a form of gambling is that players are guaranteed to get something for their money, even if it's not the item they were hoping for. However, this argument fails to consider a few things. Firstly, the fact that players are guaranteed to receive something does not mean that the odds of receiving a desirable item are not stacked against them.
We're going to bring it home, right?
Many gacha mechanics have very low odds of obtaining actually valuable items, which means you can quite easily get more money out of a customer than you would with a traditional transaction. Also, even if those things are true, which they are, all the effects that we have previously discussed still hold true. In conclusion, while some may argue that gacha are not gambling, this argument only looks at the actual act of playing the game, and the actual mechanics itself, and not on the psychological factors and the effects that both the gacha and the gambling have on people. So in the end, what does that mean? Is Genshin Impact addictive? Genshin Impact, like many other video games, has elements that entice you to keep playing. And yes, that can become addictive. Also, the added element of gacha is doubling down on that effect. There are very obvious similarities to the way that gambling works. And yes, this is very likely by design. Does that make it a bad game? No, not really. While I don't really like the whole gacha thing that much, there are many things about Genshin Impact that are actually very good. I would even say great. I do love their sense of detail in world building, in some aspects even more than what Nintendo does with The Legend of Zelda or FromSoft does with Elden Ring. While the combat system is not very hard or anything, it is surprisingly deep and satisfying. I actually even like the starting characters. While of course they are a bit more bland than the ones that you can get for money, they are actually quite well balanced and allow you to easily clear everything the game throws at you. All in all, I can understand why people, me included, actually enjoy this game. Will I stop playing Genshin Impact? Not at the moment. I am playing way less than I did maybe like a year ago, but that's because I mainly have run out of things to do. I 100%ed most of the regions, I don't really like the Spiral Abyss, and I do have enough characters maxed out that I don't really need to get anyone to make good teams. So at the moment I kind of treat the game like a manga, where every 3 weeks there is a new volume that releases. I might have been quite lucky to be raised in a way that I'm probably quite careful when it comes to money, so I think or hope that I can actually control myself quite well. I think my expenses add up to maybe 50 euros, which is okay for a game that I've been playing for 2 years. Yes, I think regulation would not be a bad thing. As long as they don't have to, they will keep certain elements in game, because as we can see, it makes them a lot of money. At the same time, I also think that players should not rely on the idea that the developer can solve all of their problems. There are a lot of things about your interaction with the game that you can actually control if you want to. And if there are some things that you look for in a game that Genshin Impact cannot give you, I'm pretty sure there's another game out there that does. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me out a lot. I hope you stay well, and bye bye.